Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 19th, 2019 school committee meeting. As always, these meetings are audio and video recorded. Call this meeting to order. We'll start with introductions to my left.
Sharon Fairbanks.
Rob Mullen.
Julie Gustucci.
Good evening, Mike Moran.
Good evening, Mark Branco, Assistant Superintendent.
Hi, Mike Flanagan, Superintendent.
Ryan McMahon.
Anthony Tenerell.
Paul Mitchell.
Becky Stanton.
Joe Messina, Business Administrator.
AJ Moore, Student Representative.
Please rise for pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll seek a motion to approve the school committee meeting minutes of November 5th, 2019, the capital asset subcommittee meeting minutes of November 5th, 2019, and the October 15th, 2019 executive session minutes.
I'll make that motion.
I will second it.
And discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries 7-0. Correspondence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two items to talk about tonight. One is the members of the school building committee will be traveling into the MSBA next Tuesday for an enrollment certification meeting. This, as you know, is one of the check boxes that we need to hit to finalize or close out the eligibility period. We're so thankful for a positive vote at town meeting, a unanimous vote at town meeting. So once we get through this enrollment certification meeting next week, the last deliverable for the MSBA is a signature on a feasibility study agreement, and then it goes before the MSBA Board of Directors for their vote to officially invite us into the pipeline. So progress is being made. Once we come back from that meeting, I'll send an email out to both the school building committee as well as the school committee, just to provide everyone an update of what transpired at that meeting. So we're excited about that being next Tuesday. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, I know last night the Board of Selectmen took a vote to look at the insurance plan. I know we talked briefly about it at our last meeting, but that will be a collaborative effort moving forward. The design is going to change, so essentially the town of Tyngsborough is going to move from the Minuteman Neshoba Health Group to the Maya recommended group. It is a much larger bargaining group with better rates, so this should yield some cost savings for the community. I don't have all the details. I don't think the town administrator has all the details at this point, but we do believe that this will be beneficial for the community in large part moving forward in terms of cost savings. I know that there are certainly union groups in the town that will have a voice as we move throughout the process, and it's going to impact the workers of the community. But I think there is a willingness on behalf of the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator and HR Director Bridget Bell to make sure that this is as palatable as possible, and that everyone feels good about it. So it's a good move for the community, and as long as everyone has their voice heard and we're all part of the conversation moving forward, I think it's going to be a great initiative. So those are the two pieces of correspondence I've received.
Thank you. Visitors, comments, and questions? I see none. Share the success. KJ?
All right, so to start things off, I go over what's been going on at the elementary school. So on the PD day, faculty worked on revisions for their standards based on report cards. They plan to roll out the changes in the next school years, and they'll be communicating to families soon. Students and teachers are working hard as trimester 1 comes to the end in the elementary school as well. Over the last few weeks, teachers have been assessing students' skills across all content areas. This information will be summarized on report cards and shared during parent-teacher conferences on December 4th to 5th. And then also in the elementary school, they kicked off their annual Adopt a Family food drive, and thanks to our school nurses, Mrs. Eisenberger and Mrs. Spanos, for making a competition out of it. So in the middle school, they had a few fundraising events. So some of them include, today they hosted a blanket fundraiser from 2 to 4, where students brought their own fleece and they made blankets, and they could choose either to keep the blankets or to donate them. They also had a Pie Mr. Paula in the Face raffle. That took place last week, and that raised money for the student council in the middle school. And the majority of the middle school fall sports have come to an end, and winter sports signups are beginning, as well as the theater signups. So theater auditions for Beauty and the Beast, which will be this year's middle school play, were held last Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And finally, in the high school, many of the fall sports teams are beginning to wrap up their seasons in the high school or have already. And the students traveling to November Give Kids a World Trip embarked on their trip to Florida this past weekend, and they're currently still in Florida. The Give Kids a World Trip is an opportunity to help grant critically ill children and their families' wishes they had. Miss Benz took a yoga class on a field trip to a local yoga studio last week, and also Mr. Dowse's digital video production class practiced applying their newly learned skills by filming the Veterans Day parade at the elementary school, and then practice editing it just so they could get real-world experience from stuff they've been learning in the class. And then finally, something new is that THS actually used a fan bus to travel to a football game in Leominster against Millbury on Saturday.
Excellent, thank you. Subcommittee updates, we have none at this time. Personnel, notification of new hires, we have Kimberly Whitney and Paul Silver as TES custodians. Welcome aboard. Number 8, unfinished business. School building committee update?
I may have stolen stuff.
Yeah, he actually stole all my thunder. Again, yeah, it's all right. Nobody wants to hear me talk anyway. But, I'd like to thank the Tyngsborough community for coming out and, like Dr. Flanagan said, actually unanimously voted to go forward with the feasibility study. In all my years in Tyngsborough and attending all these meetings, I don't think I've ever heard a unanimous vote. So that speaks volumes about Tyngsborough and their commitment to Tyngsborough Public Schools, and I'd like to thank each and every one of them that showed up and voted for it. And like Dr. Flanagan said, we have our meeting on Tuesday, so look forward to that, and hopefully we can come back and give you some more updates.
Excellent, thank you. MASC, NASS joint conference update? Julie?
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I attended the conference a week ago or so, and I went to quite a few of the workshops there, and also acted as a delegate for our school district. And so I'm going to just talk about a few of the things that I went to see. I really tried to narrow it down because there's a lot of good classes, but I tried to narrow it down to things that I thought would help this committee. And 2 of them were about, one was building community support for the school construction project, which I thought was totally applicable, and then also compelling communication, how to strengthen what the district's brand is in the community. So really trying to advertise ourselves. And both of these were done by somebody called Christopher Horan, and he's worked for many school districts to help brand them and bring them out stronger to the community. And one school district that he worked with was Boston Public Schools. And what he did with them was he tried to change kind of the perception that people had, because what was happening was people had a perception of what happened in the 70s with busing, or they had the perception that Boston Latin School was very strong, but not the public schools. And so he really worked with them to change people's perception through a lot of different types of media. He does a lot of different things, and he talks about, how can you, build a strong logo? How can you build a strong web system? How can you use social media? How can you do advertising? So he talked about many different ways to build a strong, school system, or an outlook of your school system, so that people will look at it as a strong school system. So and then at the same time, the school district had found out that there's areas where they needed to grow, so they did that at the same time too. And so with the building community support, that kind of goes along with the same thing. First of all, he talked about adhering to the laws. That's the number one thing. Make sure that everybody's aware of the laws around campaigning or not campaigning for a school project. As school committee, we're able to inform the community about facts. However, we cannot tell them how to vote, of course, which we knew about for the initial part. He also talked about designing and executing a community engagement public information campaign. It's important to form a political entity outside the school committee to advocate for yes or no votes. A lot of times people will form a parent committee. Parents will come forward and saying they're really strong for it, and that'll be a committee that will go forward. He also talked about how do you educate, everyone in the community, because it's not just the school district, it's the whole community, which means the seniors. It means I have a whole list here. It means business entities. It means I can't find my list now, but there's a whole list of people. And actually, what I did was I gave Mr. Flanagan the slideshow presentation, and he put it on your drive for you to look at. So that's important to look at because I think it'll. There's some great ideas that he had for us to go forward with that. And then thirdly, another workshop I went to was a school committee self-evaluation workshop. So it's a workshop that we could help us look at ourselves as a school committee and how are we doing. Is there anything more we can go forward with to strengthen ourselves? So what I gave you was a little handout here of an evaluation that the presenter had put together, and I thought it was pretty good. She did a crack at it, and I think it was her first try, but I thought it made a lot of sense. And if you look at the last page of it, it gives you a rubrics, and we all, as educators, all know about rubrics. A governing rubric for continuous improvement. So if you get a chance, read through that rubric and then read through the self-evaluation, because what I would like to do next meeting is to talk about if we'd like to actually do this evaluation as a group, and then possibly have some workshops where we meet as a school committee and go through some of this and decide where our strengths are and where areas that we could improve are. One of the areas that they talked about is there any written protocols for the school committee? That was something that I thought, that might be something we might want to talk about and think about doing. Do I have to make a motion for this, for people to read this and to talk about it next time? Okay. So, no, I never know what you have to make a motion for, what you don't have to make a motion for. So if you could read through it, and then next time we'll talk about it and just decide if this is something we want to do, and then figure out what areas that we want to try to improve on or strengthen. And also, it makes you realize, like same with the superintendent evaluation workshop that we did, the areas of strength that we already have, and there are a lot of areas of strength. So that was another thing I went to. And then lastly, I went to 2 workshops on teaching and learning. I mean, that's another passion of mine. And 2 workshops, one is called Maple, and it's a type of, Andover is doing it right now, and Natick is doing it. So it's a type of, basically a program that you go through. You could pass it around if you want. It's a type of program where you're trying to shift your school district into teaching each individual child and looking for each individual child's strength and gearing your education to that. So it's really a personalized learning challenge. It's kind of interesting. So that was Maple. And then also I went to one called Imagination, Intelligence, and Creativity, which is about the Hunter IQ test, which basically talks about how can you bring this out in all your teaching. Because in the future there's going to be things that the children, we don't even know what the things are that they're going to need to know about in the future. So it's really important to really push imagination and intelligent creativity with all of our children. So that's pretty much it. Then the last thing I went to was the delegate meeting, And I just want to quickly, because I've taken up a lot of time already, I want to quickly talk about the things that we voted on. And let's see if I can find them. So what happens is it's basic, voting for the people who run it, and then also about different initiatives. So Resolution 1 was banning polystyrene from schools. Resolution 2 was pertaining to educator diversity and professional licensure. Resolution 3 was school transportation and climate change. And I don't want to read all these because they're really long. Full funding of transportation costs for students in foster care and state care. Resolution 6 was university quality pre-kindergarten access in Massachusetts. Resolution 7 was about poverty in children. And Resolution 8 was resolution for access to menstrual supplies. And Resolution 9 was charter school reform. So that's what we voted for, and pretty much all of them passed. So these are things that the MCAS is going to support. So if you want to look further into what they're all about, let me know. So that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Sounds like it was worth the time to go.
Yeah, there's a lot. I learned a lot. It was great. I would recommend it to anybody if you get some time, and from the past, I always learn a lot.
Yes. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Number 9, new business.
So, Mr. Chair, tonight, each November, we ask Mrs. Lewanczyk and her team, Mr. Evans and Mr. Riley, to come forward and kind of give us an update as to where we are in terms of special ed programming this year, and really forecast the rest of the year and what should be on our radar as we start to think about moving forward with the budget season. So they're all here tonight, excited, ready to go. They have a 75-slide PowerPoint for us.
We cut it down to about 50.
Get you in trouble.
Sarah requested an hour and 17 minutes.
It was refused.
So good evening, and thank you for giving us the time to provide updates within the special education department. As Mike said, I'm joined by Josh Evans and Brian Riley, our special education facilitators. And tonight we would really like to provide you with some information on the uniquenesses of special education programming needs within all of our building levels, as well as coming back around to talk about out-of-district programming, and lastly, the impact of the budget. So Josh and Brian will begin by giving some of those updates and highlights within the building, and then I will come back around.
So as a lot of you know, last year we spent a lot of time looking at our related services and how we provide services, who's providing the services, and what supports do we need to meet all of our students' needs. And so all of our related service providers have been working with our special education and general education teachers to look at providing services in a more inclusive setting. And last year, in order to achieve part of that, we looked at our occupational therapy services. As you know, we realigned our occupational therapy providers to better meet the demands in this area by having 2 full-time occupational therapists supported by 1.2 occupational therapists. This has been a huge success so far this year. Our occupational therapists have been able to meet the student needs successfully while completing the testing demands without the additional supports that we had needed in the past. In addition to that, one increasing need that we've seen in our district is the need for augmented and alternative communication. Traditionally in the past, we've used this through contracted providers to both assess our students and then provide support to the students and our teachers. Over the past 2 years, we've been working with our speech and language providers and our contracted provider to train one of our speech language pathologists in this area. And this year, through that support, we've been able to provide those services through our own speech and language department rather than having to contract out. So that's been a huge success and meet the needs of not only our students at TES, but across the district as they come up. Josh is going to talk a little bit more about the increasing social emotional need on this campus, but that's something district-wide we've seen an increased need for. And last year, we were able to partner with McLean Hospital, one of the preeminent Boston-based mental health facilities, through their school partnership program to provide our school counselors, administrators, and other staff as needed with child-based DBT, skill training, as well as case consultation on specific cases when students need significant supports both outside of school and in school. This has allowed our school counselors to provide effective supports to students who in the past may have had greater need and potentially had to go out of district. In addition to the bi-weekly sessions that we have with McLean, our school counselors provide in-class lessons on a weekly basis to every classroom, carry caseload of counseling sessions with special education students, and also facilitate new student luncheons so that our new students are able to foster peer relationships within the building. And then one of the more impactful service updates this year has been the ability for us to hire a full-time BCBA. As you know, the past 2 years we've had a contract out for those services. Being able to hire a full-time BCBA again this year has been able to provide more comprehensive services in a more reliant and efficient manner. And she's been able to provide positive relationships across the district.
Absolutely, and just regarding the behaviorist, we're really seeing that proactive approach with having somebody who's a 1.0 that we're not contracting out as a service has been a huge success for us, not only within district, but outside district as well.
And a significant cost savings.
Correct.
Dr. Branco, if you can go to the next slide. So just going to give you an overview. We've done this every year just on the population. So currently, out of the 804 students that I think we have currently enrolled at TES, 148 students are currently identified as having special education needs. Roughly another 20 are in the referral or evaluation process. And this is just the number of students by disability category that of those 148 currently identified students have specific disabilities. And Dr. Branco, if you go to the next slide. As we've talked about in the past, the percentage of students that have moderate or high needs has really increased in the district over the last few years. So the number of related services and amount of academic support that these students are requiring has grown. And we've been able to meet those needs, but as our population increases and as our students are identified, we're seeing that more and more have significant disabilities that require significant supports in order to meet effective progress and continue in district. You'll see the breakdown of related services on the bottom. We've seen a increase in the number of students that are receiving supports in class rather than pull out supports through our related services, and that's something that across the related services have been beneficial not only to our special education students but also our general education students and our general education teaching staff.
Just to draw your eye on that, Grid B, that's your in-class support services, and Grid C is the pull-out services. So just to define that a bit for you when looking at related service.
Next slide, Dr. Branco.
All right, so this is the same type of breakdown, just grouped a little bit differently, but this is taking a look at the disability-related needs and the identified students at the middle school, and further on we'll have the high school. So right now we have 76 students that are currently identified in requiring special education services. One thing that you'll see, I think later on if you want to jump to the next slide, not to belabor this one, but we are seeing a significant increase in trends, and I'll get to it later on a little bit, but in our needs for our students requiring counseling or more social-emotional types of services. At the middle school, our number has gone down in the high a little bit in that we're trying to provide more services within the inclusive setting. So our moderate number has gone up significantly since last year, with those students coming out of that high category and then into the inclusive setting, meaning that moderate. If you want to jump down to the next one, this is just a snapshot at the high school. Same breakdown. Currently we have 49 students on ed plans, and if we jump to the next one. We're seeing the same trend with our moderate needs increasing with our students who require a high need, really going into the inclusive setting.
So maybe just to draw upon this one for a moment, and just sort of thinking back to the other slides that were shared with the elementary and middle school, this data that's represented for the 3 schools was laid out in a very similar template, as you could see. And the big takeaways here are across the district, the majority of our students are presenting with a moderate or high level of need, and that our related services represent a significant portion of that day, and that these services and level of need are significant and translate to cost. So just to really kind of pinpoint for you, as much as there's a lot of great work being done in regard to inclusive services and bringing our high into moderate, these are still related services that take on a considerable amount of time within our in-district students and within our buildings, which again translates to cost.
All right, if we jump to the next slide, Brian, if you want to jump into enrollment.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've seen over the past few years is that as our enrollment has stayed pretty steady, around 800 students each year, the percentage of students with special education needs has gone up. So as students kind of move in, we've seen an increase in the number of students that are requiring special education students services. So as we continue to move on, we anticipate even this year that our current percentage of students with special needs is currently at 19.7%. Through early intervention transitions or new home purchases in town, we have already identified that in the next month or so, we'll enroll 6 new students, and that our students with special education needs will climb to 20% or just slightly above 20%.
So same spreadsheet there, but what we're seeing is that there has been an influx of students coming in, and there have been more and more students with disability-related needs. One thing I just wanted to highlight, that in students kind of transitioning into district, really with that theme of the social-emotional needs, there's a high percentage of students requiring social-emotional needs. If I'm looking at the students currently moving in, of the students that moved in, I'd say 75% need some sort of counseling or social-emotional intervention. And if we're looking at our current referrals that we have, 71% of those students require counseling services. So I really want to highlight some of the evolving needs. I looked at the last few years of trends that we've had, and over the past 3 years, I did a look back and seeing the increased need of both special education, but even more specifically, non-special education students requiring counseling services. Our school counselors, have been tasked with providing a lot of individual counseling more consistently, and what we're finding is the increase in the number of students requiring those services is going up, but also the complexity and severity of a lot of the student needs is increasing as well. If we look at the last few years, where our counselors, and this is Norris Road, so this is our 4 counselors, we're providing individual counseling services to 42 students, 2018 to 2019, 55 students, and then increasing this year to 62 students that are receiving counseling services. So we're seeing an increase in that counseling trend. From the middle school perspective, we've been really trying to bridge the gap in the inclusive setting and provide more and more socio-emotional services from our counselors within the general ed setting. So what we've done is really embedded our school counselors in there to kind of be proactive, to really observe any changes that might be happening with students that might be servicing. So. Another trend that we've seen, and this is a biggie, is over the past few years we've seen an increase in hospitalizations on the Norris Road campus. So what I'm calling hospitalizations here are students that are requiring day placements of 10 or more days, and some of these students are requiring these types of of programming more than one time. So if we're looking at our hospitalization trend, if we look back to 2016, 2017, we had 3 students. 2017, 2018, 7 students. And since I kind of combined since 2018, 19, and the start of this year, we've had 12 students. So we're looking at an increase of students requiring some type of hospitalization, and sometimes those hospitalizations occur more than once.
It's important to note here when those students are coming back, so as they're transitioning back to district, the type of support that's going to be needed and necessary for them to continue to meet with progress when they're here is also conveyed by the clinicians at the hospitals. And then we try our very best within the counseling atmosphere and our school psychologists to work those needs for the students. So once hospitalization happens, it's not where it stops. That transitions right back here to building base. So similar to the challenges that present in district, when referrals are necessary for out-of-district placements, there's a continuing trend. And we're really seeing that trend as an increased selectivity of referrals and school profiles that are changing who they're accepting. And it's difficult to place students with those significant behavioral profiles. And that's something that is concerning in the regard that that's our most at-risk population for going out of district. So just something as we're talking about how can we meet the needs here within our district, we know there's not an awful lot of options out of district. When at all possible, we want to service our students right here in Tyngsborough Public Schools. When necessary, we certainly will look at a district, but it's not an easy transition. We're looking at those programs. A new trend is really the limited out-of-district programming that I've just started to kind of refer to, as well as the enrollment challenges and related to services with students specific to mental health, social, emotional needs. So that's just another piece in terms of some of those continuing trends and the new trends that we're seeing, which hit upon, really where Josh was going in terms of, the concerns here on the Norris Road campus, and I would certainly argue are also seen at the elementary school. So, as we've heard throughout the presentation, the unpredictability of special ed costs are predictably unpredictable. And the cost is driven by required need. When we're looking at programming for out of district, and I talked about this last year, we're obligated to look at least restrictive environment that's most appropriate for the individual student. Those conversations are not taken lightly. It's a team that sits together and talks about the individual need of that student before making any referral out. And the discussion in terms of the need really starts to drive what's the type of school we're looking at. If we're not looking at Tyngsborough Public Schools, what are the different programs available to our students? And that's where we look at public, meaning those collaborative placements, private, 365-day schools, which translates to residential placements. So just to, again, give you sort of a flavor in terms of that unpredictability piece, that's what we're looking at when we're looking at those out-of-district placements. And again, it starts with need, and then we're looking at program. And very lastly is that tuition piece, which we try to certainly be as fiscally responsible as possible, but that doesn't even come close to the beginning of what we're doing to meet that student's individual need. If you flip to the next slide, I think it'll give a better visual than what I tried to kind of convey at the bottom there. This is the breakdown of costs. So I think oftentimes it can be perceived that tuition and tuition alone is the big cost. It certainly is a cost, but it's not the only cost. So what I wanted to really represent here was a bit more in terms of what we're looking at. So when we're looking at the different schools, and we just talked about those 365-day programs, the private day schools and the public day collaboratives, what I'll do is I'll go across and just give you some examples. So if we're looking at 365-day programming, we're looking at tuition cost ranges anywhere from $221 up to $276. There's no cost when you're looking at specialized transportation because that student is there for the 365 days and into the evening programming. When we're looking at private day school programs, those programs tend to be about 190 to 220 days in length, and you can see the tuition cost range across there, which varies pretty widely, as you can see. What that doesn't do is give you also the aspect that some students may require a one-to-one. That's going to be additional cost to that tuition, as well as any other types of supports that may not be embedded in that tuition already, and those vary from school to school. As you look across, you'll see that under specialized transportation for private day schools, because again, they're going a longer length of time in terms of the day or the school year. That ranges from 33,000 to 40,000. And if that student requires a monitor, that goes between 45 to 52,000. If a wheelchair is needed, that's additional cost. So there's lots of additional costs that sometimes perhaps are not thought of that I just wanted to make sure were sort of conveyed tonight. The public day schools, so the collaboratives as you know them, are 180-day schools. That doesn't, however, mean that students that attend collaborative programs go for 180 days. Oftentimes, most times, they will go through summer programming. So that time frame extends itself easily past that 190-day programming. So under tuition cost for 180 days, we're looking at between $37,000 to, again, a varied number of $70,000. And this also needs to be taken under consideration that in collaborative settings, even though those are less restrictive than the private and 365-day programming, the students absolutely could require a 1-to-1 or sometimes a 2-to-1 in regard to the program service needs. So additional costs. So because a student is going to a collaborative program doesn't always mean it's going to be the most cost-effective route. Again, that's why we look at need first, tuition as a last, but wanted to just sort of give you some backdrop in regard to some of those breakdowns. And you can see across the specialized transportation we'll speak to the cost if you were going for that 180 days. It's important to note that whenever possible that we can do a cost share with another district in regard to reducing that transportation cost, we absolutely are doing that. And that's something DBUS is fantastic in regard to being as proactive as possible with, and that's something we certainly have conversations with pretty readily as well. Just as another note, the government is looking at different ways in which to support districts. At this point, we're not talking about 100% reimbursement for tuition. I think there's some goals in the very near future which will start to help in terms of some of those supports and aid. But right now, that's a cost in which there's not a reimbursement. So it's important to remember that the level of need is the unpredictable factor, and I think we've probably belabored on that a little bit. But and while our overall number for out-of-district and in-district students has remained relatively balanced, we know it's difficult to project cost because we balance our budget based on a moment in time. As you can see reflected on the slide, for FY20 tuition budget reflects $2,126,723 and a projected $239,197 over budget as of today. Similar to last year, right around this same time, I think within one day, we had projected over $300,000 over budget. And as a committee, you saw throughout the course of the year, that number continually go up. Why we feel it's so important that in November, or as soon as possible, we're as transparent as what we possibly can be with where we're projecting. But that, again, is as of November 19th. If something happens tomorrow where one of our students all of a sudden requires a need unlike today, or a student moves in, or any other unpredictable factors in which we've talked about come into play, those costs will go up. So again, tonight, just wanted to make sure you had as much information as we go into, the next trimester here in Tyngsborough Public Schools, and certainly any questions that we can answer for you, we would certainly like to do so. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge how proud I am of our team and their efforts for all of our families and students to be supported academically, socially, and emotionally.
So if I can just piggyback on Sarah's presentation, and thank you, guys did a great job. Two kids can go to the same school for the same number of days and have two entirely different costs. This really is an individualized program for that student. That being said, last year, 364 days ago, I think, or 6 days ago, I don't know if it was 18th or 19th, we were $368,000 over budget at that point. And as we went through the budget development process last year, it was a number that we kept our eye on and we had conversations about it. But because we were transparent about it, because we were open about it, we were able to work collaboratively with the town to develop a budget that could still meet the needs of all of our kids. As you recall from last year, our special education stabilization account supported that budget. We almost depleted that budget entirely. I don't even know, Joe, do you know how much is left in the sped stabilization account on the town side?
It's not the exact number, but it's probably about 20,000 or so. We used 115 of it.
So we used 115 of it last year, so we don't necessarily have that to go to. That being said, we also don't know how much this number is going to grow. Last year, it went from 360 all the way up to 700, 800,000. So it was significant last year. Hopefully that won't be the case this year. But at the end of the day, this team is going to do whatever they can to make sure our kids are all getting the best education they can that is appropriate for them. And we will deal with the budget as we move forward from there. But it's important for us to know this now as we start looking at what our budget development schedule is going to look like. Know that we have to increase this line item certainly by at least $250,000 moving forward to next year. So this is not the sky is falling. It's something that we need to be cognizant of. It's something we need to manage, and we need to be thoughtful with our foresight as we look ahead and start our budget conversations in a month. I think this is the perfect time of year to have this conversation every year. September's too early. At the end of the first trimester, we have a sense of where we are, and we can see how we need to project moving forward. I think this is the third or fourth year we've done this presentation at this time. So that being said, they're here to answer any questions that anyone on the committee may have.
Thanks, guys. Dr. Branca, can you go back to the slide entitled Enrollment, please?
This one?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's something jumped out at me. It's TES and TMS have virtually the same percentage of students with special education services. The high school drops to half. What causes that drop off?
Usually over that time in middle school, students are acquiring skills, and a lot of times they're able to be independent and they're able to make progress without the services afforded to them through the IEP. So it would be expected that through that middle school into the high school year that number would come down.
So it's actually a measure of success at the middle school. Excellent. Thank you.
I would say the elementary and the middle school.
Yeah.
Foundation, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
Growing, getting older, maturing, being able to really work within the strategies of the IEP developed, perhaps right within the elementary school all the way through up, and then being able to more independently navigate.
If I could jump on that same slide, number of students moving in with special education services, do we see that percentage going up?
I don't know if we can necessarily say we predict that will go up. When we've talked about sort of where we're at right now, it has been going up. But when we talk about new development and, what might be happening in terms of growth in town, we won't know until those students are registered, what the level of need is, whether or not they, will be students that have special needs coming into our district. But we can say right now we are seeing that as a trend.
I don't have any questions. I just want to thank the three of you and your teams for the wonderful job that you do. I know that it makes a very big difference in the lives of a lot of families in town. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's about 15% of the students in the town require some type of special needs. Is that fair to say?
Yep, 16.6%.
16.
And if you add our out of district to that, it comes close to a little over 18%, which is shared with the state average.
Is that similar to the local towns, and is that
We didn't do a breakdown of comparables, but knowing some of our comparables pretty well in this, in our surrounding towns, yes, it comes very close. And I can do a breakdown based on, what DESE provides for information if the committee would like.
But what is the state average? You just said you had that.
18%, 18.1% as of 18-19 school year.
So in a city like Lowell, is that a similar number, or would they be
I
much
wouldn't be
higher?
able to give you, the exact number or percentage for Lowell, but I can certainly do a lookup in comparison for you. That's not one we hold as a comparable to Tyngsborough, so it's not one we usually draw out as we would other towns that are more comparable in size.
Well, the reason why I ask is that the state, funds through Chapter 70 and other mechanisms, all the cities and towns for schools.
Yep.
And the state did some calculations a while back, and the state is paying Lowell over $11,000 per student. And it gives Tyngsborough and local towns something in the range of $4,000 per student. And one of the reasons they say that is that the needs of these gateway cities, they call them, are larger, and, people in our community figure that, a city like Lowell has their issues. They have a lot of immigrants, they have a lot of different types of students in their community, but if the percentages are similar in a town like Tyngsborough as compared to Lowell, the state's got to start realizing that, when they're forcing these communities to go to a 10% housing, affordable housing measure, that they're pushing those issues that may be in these gateway cities out to the communities, and they're putting it on the backs of the homeowners and the taxpayers. And I've had a daughter that went through the special needs services, and I was happy they were there and helpful for her, but we need to make sure that the kids that are in this community get the services that they require just as much as the kid in Lowell gets the services they require.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's an important thing that the teachers union should be aware of, because the way we are able to support the teachers and support the community is fundamental in how the state supports us. So it's something that I think that is important for communities like Dracut and Tyngsborough and Westford and Chelmsford to sort of stand up and start understanding that these gateway cities, their problems are our problems also.
And I think, maybe not to, I don't know if I would project as much to say our problems too, but I think similar to what you're saying.
Financial problems.
Yeah, they certainly could be, right? I am glad the government is starting to make steps in the direction of looking at the transportation as a reimbursable, even if it's a small percentage as a start, that they're looking in that direction, because as I showed tonight, that's a huge cost. And what we didn't even talk about was outside of special education. Specialized transportation falls right within gen ed as well. If your daughter breaks her leg tomorrow and can't get on the regular school bus and needs specialized transportation in order to get to and from school, they absolutely have that available to them. And that falls within a non-funded mandate. Our homeless population, our foster care students, again, we're talking about sometimes transportation from Tyngsborough to Fitchburg for some of our cases. And this is, again, a non-funded mandate in which does come back to districts, whether it be Lowell or Tyngsborough. So I'm at least glad the government's starting to look at some of these pieces, but you're right when you say it is of cost, without a doubt.
So that's part of the Student Opportunity Act, which I received an email today at 3:30, and it looks like the Senate and the House will be voting on that tomorrow, and then the governor will have 10 days to take action on that. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but it talks about a reimbursable component of specialized transportation. So any little bit would help. Now, whether that is considered, Joe and I had this conversation, whether that's considered part of Chapter 70 or whether that's reimbursable directly to the school district, we don't know. So we'll see how that shakes out.
Do any of these numbers include our 18 to 22?
The out-of-district population, yes. So where we have 24 students out of district, that includes our 18 to 22 students that are out of district.
And are there any needs or anything that we as a committee could bring in-house that we're currently sending out? I mean, is there...
We've looked over time and very frequently have conversations about really wanting to host an 18 to 22 program here. We know what we're doing is working well, and we're the last people that want to send students out of district, especially when they get to the point of being young adults and want to help them with that next transitional phase. The challenge that we continue to have in a district as small as we are is, will we be able to maintain over time? And if we're bringing in teaching staff and nursing availability and all the supports that are needed and necessary to meet individual student needs, if we can't sustain that, that would be highly problematic. So when we've, looked at the course of years and, who we feel may be staying in district, and that's a big, another unpredictable piece is we could look at our numbers now and know when they're going to be 18 and know what those numbers are going to look like over time, but we can't always predict if in fact the number today at our elementary school grade 1 is going to be even close to the amount of students in which we have going into grade 12 and beyond. So we have certainly looked at that, and that would be on the wish list.
For years, we've talked
For
about
years,
that.
and we've thrown up the spreadsheets and, tried
Dawn
to
Champion,
make it
one
work.
superintendent was talking about that. And
space,
one of the
everything was
things, one of the things
talking
we're concerned about is we don't want to start a program and then have to take it away.
Exactly.
That'll be a disservice to that population.
Absolutely.
So if we can't guarantee viability, sustainability for the program,
Right.
it's not worth the risk for our 18 and 22-year-old population.
What we are finding with that population is that our collaborative programming offers a wide variety of work opportunities within Tyngsborough and outside of Tyngsborough that gives options and experiences that are different than the experiences in which they have had in Tyngsborough, and that's a nice and natural transition in which they should be making. So we're feeling good about what that looks like in terms of programming. I wish we could mimic it here, but if we can't, I am feeling very good that we have a partner in our collaboratives that is doing such a good job.
And I think it's important to note that we offer a wide variety of substantial programming, and that the out-of-district students that we eventually send out of district have significant needs that when you look in terms of their a public school setting, regardless of the programming that we provide, probably wouldn't be effectively met here. And that's why when you look at also the tuitions on the tuition slide, we probably trend towards the middle to the higher end of the tuition costs because their needs are significant. So I don't think there's anything at this time in terms of programming that we could provide that we don't do already.
I was just in thinking about the potential of a new middle school or a new wing on the middle school or anything like that.
Great question.
Is that something that we should be thinking about when looking at building the school? Is there accommodations that we could be making for a student that, say, is out of district because we don't have the facility necessary to house that
Right.
student?
Yeah. Yeah, oftentimes
So-
it's not the facility as much as it is, again, being a very small district and finding appropriate cohort group. That can be a real challenge. So, I mean, I'm sitting next to two people who more than do due diligence by, can we make it work here before we look at a district? But at times, if we're looking at an individual student and we know the surrounding makeup of students around them are not a cohort group that matches sort of where their ability is at, then we have to be honest and we need to make difficult decisions. So sometimes it's not about facility as much as it is, again, we're small, and as much as that can be a benefit, it can be a drawback in this regard.
And then, just piggybacking on that, are there any students in our elementary school currently that we should look at accessibility or accommodations in whatever we choose to do, whether it's rehab the middle school or needs that these students would require that we should look at building into whatever the build out is?
Yeah, so I think we addressed that 2 years ago with our current middle school, making sure we had the appropriate space for all students, so all students could access every part of the building. So we've done that, and I think that certainly any new design, there'll be code requirements that we have to live up to, so I think that'll be part of it. But I think we're in a good spot right now for that. Right?
We are. And I would say, even before transitions are made, we're looking at the accommodations necessary and needed before those students, come across the bridge, for instance, and what do we need in order for them to access that building? What do they need in order to have their related services, whether it be physical therapy or whatever other service that they require? And if we need to build it, we'll build it. And that has certainly happened, and we budget accordingly.
And I don't know, and just thinking of this project, regardless what it is, I'm sure the state will have certain requirements that will have to be met, or potential electrical outlets, things of that nature for motorized wheelchairs or things of that nature that would have to be included in that. So.
I think one of the things is treatment spaces.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming it's going to be on this campus, what kind of treatment spaces do we need for this campus, not necessarily just the
And we've
middle
done
school.
those, we've done those, we've created all those, anything our kids need, we have in these schools.
Correct.
And we'll make sure that.
But just, yeah,
But
looking
going
forward.
forward, looking into how this, whatever design and feasibility study goes through is, that'd be a critical need to understand what types of spaces would be required in any type of facility that may be built.
Great, thank you.
Anything else?
No, but thank you all for coming in tonight.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
And I did notice that every time we have one of the schools come in and present, it rains.
What are you trying to say?
All of them.
Just a joy here?
Okay, negotiations, timeline, and potential meeting dates. So after the new year, we will begin negotiations with the administrative assistants first, and then the custodians after. Dr. Flanagan, if you could set ground rules prior to the new year,
Yes, yep.
that'd be great. Typically, we meet on the Monday prior to a school committee meeting.
Does that still work for the subcommittee?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Excellent.
So I will reach out to Ms. Santos, who is president of the Admin Assistant Association, and once we're done with that, I'll reach out to Mr. Guthrie. Excellent, go from there. Excellent.
Thank you very much. Finance, Mr. Messina?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 13 bill warrants were presented to the committee tonight. I have them all back signed, and in your drive is the list of warrant numbers, accounts, and amounts. There is no signing of payroll tonight. We will do the November pay dates at your next meeting. Also in your drive is the October financial package, the school committee budget as of the end of October, as well as the revolving account balances and the student activity account balances. And I will leave the November 1st enrollment for the chair.
Thank you. The enrollment as of November 1st, 2019 at the elementary school is 799 students. The middle school has 388. High school has 450. And we have 24 students out of district for a total of 1,661 students. Anything for other?
That's it.
Thank you, Joe. School committee discussion.
I'm all set, thank you.
I'm all set, thank you.
I'm good, thank you.
JJ?
I'm all set, thank you.
I'm all set tonight, thank you.
I'm good tonight, thanks.
Just want to thank the town for voting for the project, and hopefully it all gets straightened out in Boston and we move forward fast and furious.
Amen.
Thank you.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Just a reminder, the committee's next meeting is December 10th.
Excellent. And I'd like to echo Paul's comments. Thank you to the town for voting for the study. Important step moving forward in this process. We do have a need for executive session tonight to discuss the reputation, character, physical condition, or mental health rather than professional competence of an individual, or to discuss the discipline or dismissal of or complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual. We will return from executive session only to adjourn the regular session meeting. This action requires a roll call vote.
In favor.
In favor.
In favor?
In favor.
In favor.
In favor.
That passes 6-0. We are in executive session. Have a good night, everybody.